Do you visualize God sitting down? Chances are you at least have, because of all the references to God sitting on a throne. You know, after all, you don't stand on a throne, you sit on a throne, and since he is enthroned, there's a tendency probably to think in terms of God sitting there. Do you visualize God working? You know, it's hard to visualize work, you know, when you're sitting down, although, you know, I work all day long and I sit down all day long. That's my job, is I sit behind a desk and I think and I write and I telephone and so forth. So I guess you can work sitting down. I think, though, that most of us would probably answer that question about do you visualize God working, as that we'd probably say yes and no. I certainly know that God does work. I mean, that he's bound to work, and yet at the same time, I don't think I think of it that way. You know, in one sense, you sort of think that, well, God did a lot of work when he was designing and creating the world. But then when the world was finished, well, then we know he did it all in 7 days, and then he rested the seventh day. We know that much. And you sort of think in terms that God is today not so much working as he is watching and maybe responding and so forth to what's going on. The world, as we know it, sort of runs itself, doesn't it? You know, it keeps on going around the sun, and it would do that, wouldn't it, if nobody made it do that? And, you know, the sun comes up and the sun goes down, and the climatological patterns develop and they change and evolve. And the jet stream moves north and south, and the sun moves above and below the equator. We all know it doesn't work exactly that way, but nevertheless, we sort of tend to think in terms of the world running itself automatically. Are you sure? Are we really sure that that's what goes on? I want you to turn back to John chapter 5 to look at something that is a little provocative when you really consider what Jesus said. Now, what he has done, he went up to the Feast of Tabernacles, to one of the feasts of the Jews at Jerusalem, and there was there a pool called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches, and there were all sorts of feeble folk down there waiting to be healed for one reason or another. Well, Jesus came down there, and he found one man sitting there whom it calls an impotent man. That means he was just weak, he was powerless, he was helpless. And he said, "Sir, I have no man to, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool, and I go down there, and before I get there, someone steps in ahead of me." And Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." And immediately he was made whole, and he took up his bed and walked, and this same day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said to him that was cured, "Now it's not lawful for you to carry your bed." And he said, "Well, the man that healed me and made me whole said, carry my bed. I'm going to carry my bed. You know, I couldn't do anything yesterday. Today I can walk and carry my bed." And they said, "Well, who told you this?" And they said, "Well, it was Jesus." I mean, he didn't really know that it was Jesus, but he finally was able to learn that it was. Now, at this point, we are told in verse 16, did the Jews persecute Jesus and sought to slay him because he had done these things on the Sabbath day, a day in which no work was supposed to be done. What's interesting here, though, is Jesus' reply to this argument. Jesus answered them, "My Father works up until now." Hitherto. "And I work." Both those words in the present tense. I don't like to belabor the Greek tenses. I don't want to make a strife of words. But they are both in what is called the present tense. And the present tense in Greek denotes a linear continuing action. Some translators even go so far as to say the way it should be translated for most effective English is to say, "My Father keeps on working until now, and I keep on working." In other words, the whole idea is that the work of Jesus Christ, and particularly he is saying here the Father, is incessant. It never stops. And in the context in which he's talking about here, it does not even stop on the Sabbath day. Why did God rest on the Sabbath then? Oh, for you. As an example, for you. To hallow the Sabbath. For you. For the Sabbath was not made for God. The Sabbath was made for man. And Jesus worked 7 days a week. He worked all the hours a day that his physical body would permit him to work. He worked. And he says, "I am come to reveal the Father to you. He who has seen me has seen the Father." And I would conclude from Jesus' example and from his teachings that God the Father is like perpetual motion as far as work is concerned. And why not? For obviously he takes great joy in his work. He is a worker and the father of workers. Now, this is really kind of important for us to understand. Apparently there is an incessant activity that goes on in connection with us and this world and wherever we are of God. What do you reckon it is? What do you suppose he is doing all this time with all this work? Well, the Jews sought the more to kill him because he had not only broken the Sabbath, but he had said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. And then answered Jesus and said to them, Verily I say unto you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. For what things soever he does, so does the Son likewise. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself is doing. Oh, that's interesting. God loves the Son, and he said he shows the Son all that he is, present tense, doing. And the Son can do nothing except what he sees the Father do. Do you read that right? It doesn't say the Son can do nothing except what the Father allows. He doesn't say I can do nothing except what the Father empowers. He doesn't say I can do nothing except what the Father permits. He said the Son can do nothing except what he sees the Father do. God's at work, vigorously at work. And what you see Jesus doing, he said, is nothing except what the Father is doing. Now, you don't picture Jesus sitting, do you? Not really. When you do picture him sitting, he's sitting down to teach, which is work. But I visualize Jesus as walking. I visualize him as standing and teaching. I visualize him as moving around and teaching and doing and healing. And he is an absolute dynamo as far as being places and going places and changing lives everywhere that he goes. That's what I visualize in him. In all of creation, there is an incessant activity on the part of God which men have been, by and large, unwilling to acknowledge. And the extent to which you and I sit here today scratching our heads and saying, I know, I believe, I don't have any trouble believing that God is working hitherto, but I'm a little hard-pressed, to tell you the truth, to know exactly what and where and why and how. Of all the things that Jesus could have revealed to us about the Father, what could be more important than the Father's work? You know, all sorts of things you and I would like to know about God. You know, we'd like to know, what he looks like. We would like to know what the sound of his voice is like, at least we think we would. We'd like to know a lot of things about God, but when you stop to think about it, of all the things Jesus could have revealed to us about the Father, what could possibly be more important than to reveal to us the Father's work? Now, if then Jesus himself is the incarnate expression of the Father, if he says to us, you have seen me, therefore you have seen the Father, if he said, I am here to reveal the Father to you, then I would have to conclude that when we look at what Jesus Christ is doing, we gain a clue to what God is doing. I want you to turn back with me now, this just a couple of chapters in John, to chapter 2, verse 1. The third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, Woman, what do I have to do with you? My hour is not yet come. His mother said to the servants, Whatever he says to you, do it. There were set 6 water pots of stone after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. Jesus said to them, Fill the water pots with water. They filled them right up to the brim. And he said to them, Draw out now and bear to the governor of the feast. So they drew it out and they took it in there. When the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, it's interesting how subtly John puts that in. He doesn't say, well, all of a sudden the water was wine. He said they picked it up, carried it in there, and he tasted not the wine, the water which had become wine, and he didn't know where it came from. The servants knew. The governor called the bridegroom and said, Every man at the beginning has set forth good wine. And when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But you have kept the good wine until now. Can you remember the best bottle of wine you ever had? Where was it? Where were you at the time? Now, of course, you have to understand that the food you have with wine often has a lot to do with how good it really was. And a lot of times the friends who were with you have a lot to do with how good it really was. But I remember where certainly one of the best bottles of wine I ever had was. I remember what it was, too. It was a Chateauneuf du Pape, but it was a particular vineyard's Chateauneuf du Pape. It was de la Nouveau Gardien, I think it was. It came in a little oblong-shaped bottle. It was pretty expensive, although not nearly as expensive as some other wines on the menu were. And it had a delicate, fruity taste and bouquet that was just delightful. Of course, it went perfectly with the food we were having that night, and it was a superb bottle of wine. Where was yours? You might want to think about that and argue with some of your friends about which was the best bottle we ever had on one of our outings or what have you. For the longest time in my life, it would have been Gallo Port. But I hadn't had much wine back in those days. Didn't know very much about it at all. When you think about it, what Jesus created on this occasion was really rather unusual because, when you think in terms of making wine, or creating wine, there is an incredible complex of things that actually go into a bottle of wine, or a skin of wine, as it would have been in these days. There are various and sundry enzymes that actually are in this wine that actually, once the wine is opened, exposed to the air, begin to oxidize the wine slowly so that the flavor of wine about a half hour after the bottle is open is quite different from what it was the very split second that the bottle was open. It can be very, very different. And you'll have a waiter that will often ask you, would you like me to let this breathe? And, of course, the knowledgeable person, when he comes in, will order his wine early. We'll have the waiter set it aside for, while they're going through the salad and so forth, and only actually serve the wine when the main course is brought because of the length of time necessary for the wine to breathe and to go through that little oxidation that brings it to just the right point in time. Now, when Jesus created the wine, what came out was already, I gather, had already breathed. It was already brought down to just exactly the right level. It was at the right temperature. It had just exactly the right balance of acidity and a little bit perhaps of tannin, the little tinge of that in there. Because you get too much of that, wine can be a little bit bitter. If it's a little bit too less, a little too little, it doesn't have quite the right taste. So there are all of the little balances of acidity and the particular type of grape that goes into it. And each grape has a different flavor of its own. Which grape do you suppose was the flavor that was in that wine? Who knows, of course, no way. But the wine had to be superb. It had to be one of the finest kinds of grape that were going. Was it a Pinot Noir, a Zinfandel? Of course, it preceded those by, or even the awareness of what those grapes were by many, many generations. It was beautiful wine that Jesus created on this day. You don't think of all those things exactly. Let me ask you this. Where does wine come from? Well, it comes from grapes, doesn't it? Where does a grape come from? It comes from a grapevine. Where does the grapevine come from? Do you think in terms of soil on a hillside in California, perhaps? Do you think in terms of shoots of grapes that were brought over on ships generations ago and nurtured by families and carefully pruned and kept, planted and new offshoots designed, and whole vineyards built of them over generations of families? And how that these grapes then are all laid out properly in the vineyard. And God has taught the grapevine how to take water and minerals from the soil, how to bring those water and minerals up and to create leaves, which then take sunlight on them, and through the process of photosynthesis creates and generates the power to begin to bear fruit and bring forth these little berries that are all full of this very sweet, sugary meat. There's a tremendous differentiation, too, between the sugar content of one grape or another, and in consequence, even the alcohol level of the wine is very different. And bear in mind, the wine that Jesus made had alcohol in it on that occasion. So here's the little berry with sugar, and these are all taken and picked, and then they are put in a vat and crushed. But, and then there's nothing you can do. You put it in a vat, you keep it at a constant temperature, and you're absolutely helpless. There is nothing you can do to make it start fermenting. You can, of course, chemically, I suppose, stop it from fermenting once it has started. But you see, in the grape, there is this beautiful synthesis between the mold that settles on it in the vineyard, to where really you don't even have to add anything to the grape. It's all a part of God's design. And so the grape is crushed, it then ferments, And then finally, once it is filtered and clarified and the top is skimmed off, and then it's put in a bottle or a skin and aged. How long had the wine that Jesus served on this occasion been aged? But you see, it tasted like it had been aged. It was fine wine. Do you realize that God has been turning water into wine every year since Noah came off the ark? Do you see what Jesus meant when he said, I'm not doing anything except what I see the Father do? The difference is not that I'm trying to say that the miracle of turning water into wine was not a great miracle, for indeed it was astonishing. What I'm saying is that you and I go year in and year out, day in, day out. We'll go out to dinner and we'll order a wine and we'll set that beautiful little glass, tulip-shaped glass, with that incredible, dark, rich burgundy color that we hold up to the light. We look at it, we sip it, we taste it, we enjoy it, and we love it, and never so much as think for a moment about the one who made it. What Jesus did when he turned water into wine did immediately and personally what God has been doing on a wholesale scale ever since Noah walked down off the ark, and doubtless before. Turning water into wine. You see, the message here is one that is so easily overlooked. That Jesus, we understand, actually saying fill it up with water and having it turn into wine, very personally caused that water to become wine. Don't we understand that the message for us is that every glass of wine we drink was provided for us by a personal God, not by an impersonal force. And he is not only the creator, he is the sustainer of all things. This wasn't just a sideshow stunt. This wasn't just something to impress his mother. It wasn't merely something to impress the people who were around. History would not have been changed if Jesus had not turned that water into wine. Why did he do it? It was a part of a pattern. Part of a pattern which I feel many people have overlooked. Turn back to Matthew the 15th chapter and I'll show you what I mean. Matthew chapter 15 and verse 32. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion on the multitude because they continue with me now 3 days, and they have nothing to eat, and I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. His disciples said to him, well, where are we going to find so much bread out here in the wilderness to feed these people? And Jesus said, how many loaves do you have? They said, 7 and a few little fishes. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. He took the 7 loaves and the fishes, and he gave thanks, and he broke them, and he gave to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and they were all filled. And they took up the broken meat that was left, 7 baskets full. And of all those who ate, there were 4,000 men, plus women and children, who ate on this occasion. And he sent the multitude away, and he took ship, and he came into the coast of Magdala. Now, you look at that. Do you realize that the Father has fed, not 4,000, not 5,000, but every man, woman, and child who has ever come into this world? Now, we sit down at home, and the food is on the table, and we bow our head and we give thanks. What are you thinking when you give thanks? Now it's easy to see the miracle when all you had was these little loaves and these little fishes, and Jesus took them in his hand and broke them and broke them and broke them and broke them. Well, it fed 4,000 people. That's a very personal message. He touched everyone's food with his own personal hands. But don't you understand that the God who fed you this morning is no less personal? Just as personal, just as real, and had to work in order for you to eat. This is what men seem not to be able to acknowledge. Who teaches the grain to grow? Who teaches the fish to spawn? Who brings those salmon right back up the same river to the place where they were eventually hatched out of their little eggs? To the same spot, to the same stream, the same tributary, and causes them to spawn there one more time? And who brings the male up there along with the female to the same place he was spawned to fertilize the eggs? And who takes them back out to the sea and brings them back again and again and again and again? Who caused the fish in the Sea of Galilee to go up the little tributaries, to spawn, and to come back far in greater numbers so that all these people could eat? You see, Jesus did personally, miraculously. But is it more of a miracle than the fish you ate this last week? Was it more of a miracle than the bread you had for breakfast? Who taught it to grow? All that came, from just a little bitty piece of grain that was thrown in the ground and covered up in the hundreds and thousands of bitty pieces of grain, and was left up here on the plains of Kansas for the rain to water it. And who made it rain? Who brought the rain across? For you see, bread is grown, wheat is grown in such numbers that merely trying to irrigate it would be backbreaking. It's got to be grown where it will rain on it. You can grow your fruits and your vegetables by an irrigation and make that work economically, but not wheat. God has got to have that rain come through. And He's got to teach the wheat to grow. And He is the sustainer of everything. And when Jesus came and fed those people, what He's saying to them personally is that the God who has been feeding you for all generations is just as real, just as personal as am I. Do we acknowledge it? Do we really understand it? Jesus, in a boat, sound asleep, is woken up because they say, Lord, there's a storm, we're about to go down. He walks out on the prow of the boat, rebukes the wind, and stops. Guess who controls the weather? Because remember, Jesus said the Son can do nothing except what He sees the Father do, because the Father has shown Him everything that He is doing. Do we acknowledge it? Then there's healing. Now, we all know about healing, don't we? In fact, a lot of us have experienced God's power of healing at times. But you ever noticed how thorough Jesus was in His ministry? How thorough. He healed eyes and ears, healed arms and legs, He healed backs and tongues, He healed skin, He healed bones, all these things. He healed mental illness, and He straightened out body chemistry that was wrong. He overcame congenital infectious and degenerative diseases, and He even overcame death. Do you ever think about that? What that means? He actually demonstrated through all of this thing that He is in command of all there is that affects the human body. Now, there is a way, a manner of speaking, and you need to understand this, that every time you become sick, and every time you get well, you owe getting well to God. Sure you do. He is daily active. Every healing, whether it be at the hands of a doctor or what have you, takes place inside your body. It has to do with what your body is doing. Your body is creating new cells. Your body is creating T cells to fight off infection. Your body is the one that gets you over a cold. When you are in bed and got this raging fever going on here, that's your body. That fever is not a disease. That fever is your body responding to that disease to cook it to death if it has to do it. And hopefully it won't have to cook you to death in the process. God designed your body. And it is by the power of God, indirectly, through your body, that you are healed every time you are healed. You've broken an arm. You go down to the doctor. He gives you a shot or helps, tries to keep you calm, straightens it out and puts it in a cast. And you go home. Did He heal your arm? Of course not. We all know how your arm gets healed. Your arm gets healed because your body heals itself. And who designed it? Who made it so? Who saw to it that it would? And if I have to go so far as to say it, who sustains it that it will? In a sense, all healing is of God. More sick people have been healed indirectly or directly by God through what their body does for itself than all the medical practitioners in the world combined. It happens every day, all the time. There's one more of Jesus' miracle, though, I want to take you over to in the 21st chapter of Matthew, because it's also an important side of this when Jesus said, I can't do anything of myself but what I see the Father do. Matthew 21 and verse 17. He left them, and He went out of the city to Bethany, and He lodged there. In the morning, as He returned to the city, He was hungry. And when He saw a fig tree in the way, all leafed out, He came to it, and He found nothing on it but leaves. By this time the fig tree should have had fruit. And He said to it, Let no fruit grow on you henceforward forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, look how soon the thing is just gone. And Jesus said, verily I say unto you, if you have faith and if you don't doubt, you'll not only do what was done to this fig tree, but also if you will say to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, it shall be done. Jesus could do nothing except what he saw the Father do. And you know, in a sense, there is no tree on the face of this earth that dies, that has not died because of what God did or perhaps did not do to it, withheld from it, because he controls the weather, and even the little insects that attack a tree are within his hand. What am I saying? I'm saying, frankly, that God works. He is incredibly, incessantly active. And that we, I think, sometimes forget that there is a personal God behind that activity that is going on around us all the time. A personal God who designed all that we are and all that our bodies do. A personal God who designed our whole agricultural big pyramidal structure that feeds us and keeps us alive. A personal God that designed our planet so that the weather would operate in a certain way. And if we stay in harmony with it, it feeds us and it clothes us. Personal God. What do Jesus' miracles mean? As I said earlier, he performed acts up close and personal. There was a personal force behind all of them. But the guiding power and force behind all these wholesale activities of God is personal, is the message that Jesus Christ conveys to mankind through all of that. Now, I want you to turn back to Psalm 104. It's an astonishing psalm, frankly, in the depth and the breadth of what it covers. The 104th Psalm. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with honor and with majesty, who cover yourself with light like a garment, who stretch out the heavens like a curtain, who lays the beams of his chambers in the water, who makes the clouds his chariot, who walks upon the wings of the wind, who makes his angels spirits and his ministers a flaming fire, who laid the foundations of the earth that it should not be removed forever. You covered it with the water like a garment, and the water stood above the mountains. And he harkens back to the point of time when the entire face of the earth was covered with water from one end to the other. And the eternal God, in the process of so doing, at that moment of time probably, put all those fossil fuels deep, deep, deep beneath the surface of the earth. How deep now are they pulling up oil from? It's way beyond the 6,000 and 7,000 foot level. I think they're down around 15 now, aren't they? Before that, we're 15,000 feet beneath the feet of man and beneath the surface of the oceans. They are now pulling up oil. Oil is a fossil fuel. It is organic. It actually is composed of great, huge masses of buried life. God Almighty, way back in time, put all that there. It was all a part of the plan. When you go down and you fill up your car at the gas pump, you actually are receiving something that was put there for you by God. Oh, to be sure, they go down by the valleys into the place where you have founded them. You have set a bound that they may not pass over, that is the waters, that they return not again to cover the earth. He sends the springs into the valleys which run among the hills. You want to know where the water comes from? When we float down the Buffalo River every spring and we come along this little place where there's water trickling down the hillside, where the thirsty traveler can pull his boat over to the side, take his little bottles and jugs up there and fill his jug with cool, cold water right out of the heart of the earth. God says, I've arranged all that. I designed all. I thought that through. You know, you tend to think of things like a glass of wine as being some sort of an accident, a beneficial accident. Oh, no, no, no. It was all thought through from the very beginning. It was all thought through and all planned as to how the mold which settles upon the grape would ferment and how the sugar could be turned into alcohol, which made you feel better when you have a couple of glasses of wine and be able to relax and talk with your friends. It goes on to say, these springs give drink to every beast of the field, and the wild asses quench their thirst. By these springs shall the fowls of the heaven have their habitation, which sings among the branches. Sat out there this morning in my study, in my family room, and looked out the window. We have a little hummingbird feeder out here, watching these birds come and grow and having their battle of Britain every morning, because there are about 5 of them, and they all think that each one of them alone should have access to that hummingbird feeder. Today, a couple of bees decided they deserved equal time. And so I could sit there and watch this byplay going on. Watch these incredible birds Unbelievable birds who can go like a bullet and stop on a dime. I mean, they can be going, it seems, at such an incredible speed. The next thing you know, they're stopped and they're hovered there. Watching these two dancing and pirouetting around with one another with the most incredible ballet. And how they would fly down and come face to face right down at the level of my deck and then sit there toward each other and hover and then go straight up hovering, looking each other right in the eye. And then fly off and then come back and do the whole thing over again. And again. And again. Who designed that there for me? Are hummingbirds necessary to the balance of nature? I'll bet they could all be gone and you'd never know the difference. But I would know, and the people who watch them would know, and the people who look at them and they consider the design and they look at the great God and they realize that there was a person behind the design of those birds would know. He goes on to say then that he causes the grass to grow for the cattle. Causes it to grow. I mean, the implication is that stuff wouldn't grow if he didn't make it grow. You know, sometimes those of us who are trying to grow lawns wish it would grow and then stop. You know, get up and then quit. You ever go down and sit, lie on your belly in the grass and just, take a magnifying glass or something and just look at a growing, living piece of grass? Say, thank you, God. Because it is because of that that you're able to eat. It's because of that you're able to have beef on the table once in a while. It's because God makes the grass to grow so the beef can go out there and eat it. Or your good, nice cold glass of milk you had. Never occurred to you that was designed. That was all planned, all worked out. Not just some fortuitous accident. There was a person who thought about that. And said, I think this would be good. It would taste good on a hot day, to have a good cold glass of milk. He even designed the idea of beer and made it so it would work that way. So that a man, when he's been out working and is hot and sweated and dehydrated, could take that long, cold first draft of beer on a hot afternoon and thank God for it. No, not Adolf Coors. God. Adolf was a good fellow, and he found a good way to brew beer, but then he wasn't the one who originated it. He just carried it on from what someone else had given him from a long, long time ago. Beer has got to be, along with wine, some of the oldest beverages known to man. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle and herb for the service of man. Little mint, that you get out of your garden, easy to make that stuff grow. God makes that grow. And you're able to take these little mints out of there and you can put them in drinks and desserts and what have you, and they add this delightful flavor to things that we have. That somebody thought about that. Didn't you understand? Somebody personally thought about it. He said that he may bring forth food out of the earth and wine that makes glad the heart of a man. Yeah, it was actually thought out and designed. And even the fact that it made glad the heart of a man was thought about. And you know how it is. You're sitting around with friends and you have a glass of wine and another. And you sit there and you laugh and you talk and you feel so good and you enjoy yourselves. Like anything else, it seems like in this world, if you go beyond the bounds of propriety, then you start feeling bad. And you wake up in the morning with a terrible hangover and it makes you, makes you sick. It can be abused like anything else, but it wasn't designed for that. The whole thing was all thought out in conjunction with the human body and the effect that it would have on the human body. The ability to make it in differing and varying colors because it is an incredibly beautiful beverage. To be able to give it this incredible variety of flavors so that it actually does. Many people poo-poo the idea that, you have red wine with red meat and white wine with white meat and so forth. And, of course, there's no rule that says you must. But I will tell you this, your palate will tell you that certain things go and certain things don't. And you'll find certain combinations of wine and food that are absolute ambrosia. They're absolutely marvelous. And forget completely that God in heaven designed it so, that he intended it so. And forget, I'm sorry we do, but we forget to give thanks. And when we do give thanks, oftentimes it's just sort of automatic, and we don't really realize that the miracle of providing the glass of wine that you may drink tonight is not less than the miracle Jesus performed when he actually provided wine for the ruler of a feast. To be able to take it in hand and marvel over the mind of the great God who provided that blessing, small as it may be, for you. And oil to make his face to shine. And bread that strengthens man's heart. And what's better than good, fresh bread? I mean, even if it's white bread and you're going down the street by this bakery where they're baking Mrs. Baird's bread, you almost feel like stopping your car and going inside and saying, is it coming out of the oven right now? I'd like to have some fresh bread. And then there's some of these beautiful, coarse, dark breads. Something like the Schwarzbrot that you find in Germany, that you get that bread fresh and right out of the oven. Oh, it's incredible. Who designed all this? Who made all this possible? God thought it all out a long time ago. The process by which yeast ferments. Once again, yeast at a very, the room is full of yeast spores. You don't even know they're here. But those little yeast spores are what make possible makes possible your bread to rise. It makes that gorgeous fragrance that you smell of fresh baking bread in the oven. God thought about that, And He made it fragrant to you so that you would appreciate it. Happened probably also to make it fragrant to your dog, because they are generally become very friendly and attentive about the time you get ready to take fresh bread out of the oven, don't they? They are very intrigued by the smell that come from there. The trees of the Lord are full of sap. The trees are, you ever think about maple syrup? Here's the sap of a tree, that we were able to boil it down and make this delicate, perfect flavor to go over the top of our pancakes in the morning, along with that oil or butter, which makes our face to shine and makes us fat in the process. The cedars, the trees of the Lord, are just full of sap. Some of it we can eat. He said, then the cedars of Lebanon, which He has planted, which when you wander in amongst a stand of cedars like that, the smell is not to be compared with anything on the face of this earth. It's absolutely unbelievable, the smell of a cedar forest. Where the birds make their nests, as for the stork, the fir trees are her house. The high hills are a refuge for the wild goats, and the rocks for the conies. What a feeling it is to be wandering up in the high country from place to place and see a little speck on a hillside just opposite, and put your glasses on it and see a wild mountain goat hanging over there on a precipice. And you wonder, how in the world did he ever get there? And then to see him move to another place and wonder how in the world he did that. They seem to be able to go right up a sheer rock face. It's beautiful. And only a few venturesome souls ever get up to where they can see that marvelous miracle of God take place. And it is a miracle of God when you consider the design of the critter that can stand on those little narrow rock ledges and has the balance and the fearlessness to make the move from one to the other. My dog gets nervous about going downstairs. He appointed the moon for seasons, and the sun knows the time to go down. It goes down every day, very consistently. You already can know exactly what time the sun will be down tonight. It was 8:13 last night. It'll be something close to that tonight. And it won't be way off from that. It'll be consistent. And it is so because God said it so. You make darkness, and it's night, wherein all the beasts of the forest do creep forth. And it is fascinating, isn't it, that they all sleep in the day, and then when the sun goes down at night, these night sounds begin to come. The frogs and the crickets, and particularly the frogs, the tree frogs, and the weather gets just right, and the temperature is warm enough at night, and the mating season sets in for them. On the river, the sound of all those frogs is just unbelievable. Larry gets to where he takes his earplugs with us when we go fishing up there, not because of my snoring, but because of the frogs on the river. And now up and down the river, the old bullfrogs get punctuated with a big chug-a-rump amidst all the high-pitched sounds of the other frogs. It's a symphony. It's a symphony, and the strangest thing, it's noisy, but it's not a noise you mind. It's a noise that makes you feel good. And you can think, when the full moon comes over the mountain behind you, how good it is to be alive, and how great the God is that designed all that and performed this incredible miracle here tonight just for you. For the frogs don't care about it at all. They are just doing what frogs do. The only ones that care about it are the people who happen to be able to go to a place like that and to enjoy it. Man goes forth to his work and to his labor when the sun arises, after the beasts have gone back to their dens. He goes forth to his work and his labor to the evening. O Lord, how manifold are your works. Those are not merely works, though, in the past tense, and this is what I think sometimes we tend to forget. In wisdom, you have made them all with careful forethought and with planning. You have made them all. The earth is full of your riches. So is this great and wide sea, in which all things creeping innumerable, small and great beasts. There go the ships. There is that Leviathan whom you have made to play, I guess a sea monster, in the ocean. These all wait on you, that you may give them their meat in due season. Who feeds all these animals? Who is the great zookeeper? You may gather them together. They open their hand. You open your hand. They are filled with good. You hide your face, and they're troubled. You take away their breath, and they die. There is a divine activity, incessant, in all the world around us all the time, then it is sustained by God. He opens his hand to them, and they are filled. He closes his hand, and they die. It is as simple as that. He then goes on to say, these all wait on you. You hide your face, they are troubled. You take away their breath, they die. You send forth your Spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the earth. The glory of the Lord shall endure forever. The Lord shall rejoice in all of his works. He looks on the earth and it trembles. He touches the hills and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. My meditation of him shall be sweet. I will be glad in the Lord. Let the sinners be consumed out of the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless thou the Lord, O my soul. Praise you, the Lord. There's a psalm which tells you in the simplest possible terms that God works. That he works now, that he works incessantly, and that he works continuously. And then here's Jesus Christ telling us, I can't do anything except what I see the Father do. He who has seen me has seen the Father. And I don't think we have appreciated the extent to which Jesus Christ came and showed us personally that what is behind all of this activity that we see around us on every side at all times is just as personal as was he. Look at the 105th Psalm. Oh, give thanks to the Lord. Call upon his name. Make known his deeds among all the people. Sing to him. Sing psalms to him. Talk about his wondrous works. Glory in his holy name. Let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his face evermore. He has a face. He has a face. This is not some faceless, nameless power in the universe. God has a face. And as Jesus Christ had a face and could be known, and as you could look into his eyes and talk to him and hear him talk to you, and just as personally as he can heal the sick, which he did, just as personally as he can turn water into wine, even so, that great God gives you all of the things that you have need of, all the things that you desire. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his face evermore. And then finally, this warning of warnings. Remember his marvelous works that he has done, his wonders, and the judgment of his mouth. Remember. Because it is so easy. We have a habit, don't we, among us of returning thanks at meal. We have a habit a lot of times when we're at home and we have guests over or what have you, of pausing before we eat and bowing our head and thanking God for what he has given us. Next time you pause to do that, take a second look at your glass of wine before you bow your head. Look at the bread on your table before you bow your head. Consider carefully the fish that lies on the plate, or the chicken, or the beef, and realize just how much you really have to be thankful for that person who has a face, who works all the time.